This is Cliff Desmond from the Swap Shop on WPSL, heard every Monday through Saturday morning between 9:05 and 10 a.m., where you can call in for free and make yourself some money each day, Monday through Saturdays. But the reason why I'm talking to you right now, here on this YouTube video, is so that you can share this with your friends. And what you're doing is you're sharing the QR code that takes you to WPSL TV. Now, if you can remember WPSLTV.com, it points you to our YouTube presence. The QR code takes us not only to our YouTube presence, to the videos we have stashed up on YouTube. So take your camera from your cell phone or, your iPhone or your smartphone or whatever kind of phone you've got. It's probably got a camera on it. Go ahead and, center the camera on the box and kind of back away from it a little bit to where a little guideline pops up on the screen that shows it. And about that time, you'll also see a little box appear on the top of your cell phone screen, which you click with your fingers and go directly to our YouTube presence, WPSLTV.com, on YouTube under WPSL TV. We'll see you on the radio.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 10:08 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. You're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And it is a beautiful Friday. At least it's warmer.
Mm-hmm. It's gorgeous.
It is. It's
We need to move the studio out there. It's beautiful.
It would be. We could do a live broadcast sometime, but you wouldn't have your pretty board.
Well, I'd use the one from
You'd have to use the one from,
Yeah, it's small, it's smaller than
I gotcha.
anything in here. Yeah. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah. So, and as I say that as I'm fiddling and playing and adjusting Mr. Mevo there. We call him Mr. Mevo.
See, we could do it in the front yard of your synagogue over there and just kind of sit out there. And besides, it's almost right across the street from my house. So that would really work.
Yeah.
And we just zoom into Cliff.
That works. We could try that sometime. Maybe we could do some special things. I don't know. We'll have to take a look at some of those things. Lots of opportunities with the increased mobility. No longer the 70-pound camera of yesteryear, where you had to rush to get the film in.
Yes.
Right. There's a reason why it says film at 11, right?
Oh yeah. Well, in back in the day before you were born, we had in Tucson it was before the 70s, but from my era, which was 70 to 74, and we had one film developer, and he was on Campbell in Tucson, and all three television stations use the same place. And it was always a race to see who would get to Arnie's first.
Because whoever got to him first got the darkroom.
That's right. Right.
I can remember in my college days loading those film holders.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you used to practice till you got the skill to not kink the film loading it. It was and God forbid somebody opened the door at the wrong time.
You're toast if that happens.
Yeah.
But were you using on the sound reels? Were you using the big 400-foot?
That wasn't a sound reel. That was just film. I worked for a photographer.
Oh, still stuff.
Still stuff.
Oh, I thought you meant motion.
I actually know what airbrushing is.
Wow, that does go back.
Yeah.
Woo. Okay.
Black and white airbrushing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So he used to do photo shows, and he actually took a couple of my photos with him.
We had a photographer at KVOA, Frankie Velasco, who was a great still photographer, and he was really, really amazing with black and white stuff.
Yeah, you could do some amazing things with. Well, there was both the film, taking the good shot, cropping it, knowing how to adjust it in the dark room, and then airbrushing.
Wow.
All those wonderful techniques that actually modified photographs. So,
See, I never was really into that side of it.
oh, I did. I learned to paint the eyes and get rid of the extra dots and all kinds of stuff,
Wow.
and how to colorize photos.
And we used to have also at KVOA big black bags.
Yeah, that you carry stuff.
Well,
For
not
the film.
only carry stuff, but if you're loading film
Yeah.
out in the field, you have to put your hands
Yeah.
in the bags and then
Yeah.
work in the dark, if you will.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because the film was so sensitive.
Oh, you bet.
Just a little bit of light and you were toast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gone are the days. Now you don't even have to see what your camera is doing on your phone to get a great shot. Case in point, there was an eclipse going on, and Bill and I were coming back from a conference in Utah,
Mm-hmm.
and we had gone all the way through the reservation between that's up in northern
Oh, by Monument Valley.
all of the reservations, Utah and
God.
Arizona.
It's beautiful.
And
there.
the one thing we kept saying is, why are people lining up in the rest stops with cameras? We didn't put two and two together. We had not paid attention to the news to know that an eclipse was coming. And we were coming down out of Prescott, coming toward Phoenix.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it actually started, and people were swerving off the road and going onto the shoulder to whatever, to watch it, to get pictures of it.
Yeah.
And I can remember I didn't want to look at it, but I held my phone up and click, and I got a bunch of good shots
Neat. Good stuff.
right from the car, just
Yeah.
out the
Oh, yeah.
window. Fortunately, the phone didn't depart through the window, which is, of course, the other danger with that process.
We went down, gosh, I can't remember what year. It's 90, I think. Whenever the big eclipse was, and we went, a friend of ours had a boat very similar to ours, and we went down to Cabo San Lucas in a cruiser, and it was just great. And so we got boarded by the Navy because it was in June, and of course that's Chubasco season down there, and so they wanted to find out what we were doing. We said, we're going to Cabo for the eclipse. Okay. and so it was, we're on the beach in Cabo, and it just turned dark.
Yeah.
At 10 a.m. It was absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, it's and to try to imagine what that must have been like when people didn't know it was going to happen.
Yeah. Well, and what was so funny in Cabo was when the sun broke back out of the eclipse, the roosters all started to crow.
Yeah, well, 'cause it was a change in light.
That's right. It's like, oh my gosh. Yeah, it was amazing.
So for those of you who have roosters in the city, when the headlights from a car hit it, and it says, "Hello, you woke me," noise.
Yeah, it's amazing.
When the dogs were young, they used to react to that a lot more than they do now. They've gotten used to it.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, but eclipses are just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
They really are.
They really and it confuses all the animals. The night animals come out because they think, it must be an early night or something.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, they
That's
must have been
crazy.
much more terrifying when people didn't know what was happening.
Well, and I think about, like, say, the horses, how they would react if you were riding at that time.
Oh, they'd get spooked because it
Yeah,
happens too
yeah.
quickly. It happens just too quickly, and it's noticeable. It's sunny, and then all of a sudden, it's weird. Yeah, even with the partials, it's pretty impressive. So who knows? Who knows how people interpreted it way back when? I'm pretty sure that people who lived long enough saw multiples because it just happens. And in those days, they probably spent a lot more time watching the sky because they didn't have phones and TVs and movies. And poor Cliff over there is really battling technology with his phone. That's not me, folks. That is Cliff.
That was Cliff's phone. But it was. Is there anything in the Talmud that
that's a good
refers
question.
to that?
I'm gonna have to defer. It's not coming to my mind instantly, but that doesn't mean it's not there. I will hopefully remember to check. Yeah,
that would be fascinating.
Yeah, I'll have to see because again, if you lived long enough, you knew it happened periodically, and people were not stupid back then. Just because they didn't have everything we have now. They were able to see a lot more of the sky. They could see things happening. And eclipses on the moon are fairly common. So seeing one of the sun just probably looked like a more spectacular version of what the eclipses on the moon were. And I'm sure that people watch the moon eclipses quite often. Yeah, as Christian scripture says, right, when you're out with the sheep at night, that means you're sleeping outside. Mm-hmm. So, some part of the night you're probably watching the night sky. And having seen it from Kitt Peak, having seen it over the hills of the Appalachian Mountains, which are not hills, folks, they are mountains, complete with lenticular clouds. But if you're in a small airplane and you can see out away from the city lights, away from the light pollution, the sky is astounding. I can remember coming back on a night flight, actually, with Bill, and we were coming from Harrisburg to Ohio and to Akron, Canton, where we were based. And we had gotten over the Appalachians, so there's not a lot of cities there to shine their light into the sky and make it harder to see. And we actually saw the Milky Way and just amazing things. Yeah. The fact that most kids today never see the Milky Way.
Well, there's so much light pollution now. I mean, all the cities are...
Well, and especially here in Florida. Coming out of Tucson, it was so hard. Tucson is one of the places where they value dark sky. We've actually got a dark sky area in Okeechobee. There is a small observatory that a campgrounds in Okeechobee runs, and you can reserve it. You have to go in at daylight, and it is a dark space area, but you have to make special provisions.
Wow, I wonder if it was one of the campgrounds right by the lake, because we went... That's how we got to Florida Southwestern. They took us down that route, and I'd never been that way.
It's gorgeous.
Oh,
it's spectacular.
Amazing.
But yes, I think it is one of the campgrounds, either on or close to the lake.
And we're talking like some serious RVs in those campgrounds.
Yeah,
we're not talking little trailers.
Yeah, well, and the observatory part of it's away from the main campgrounds. Huh. So you have to make a reservation to go in there at night, and I'm sure it's partially to make sure that you get in there early, and get ready for the dark.
Sure.
Because who wants to go traipsing across any part of the countryside in the deep dark? And they don't want you using flashlights because that'll ruin the dark space for everybody.
That's so cool. I didn't know it was there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because the effect of light pollution is just mind-boggling until you see it. I can remember watching the stars disappear coming down out of Kitt Peak and coming back into the city with and as I said, Tucson has many provisions in it for dark sky, such as lights are not allowed to shine up. You have to have caps or hoods on the light so that they only shine down, but you still get reflected light back up. It's the counter side to the line in the liturgy that says, with a single candle, the dark space is not completely dark. And that's very true for astronomers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. With a single candle, the stars disappear. It's not completely dark.
Well, and, I remember back in the day when I was doing UNLV basketball, And the town was growing, but obviously not like the 2 million people that live there now. But you could actually see the Milky Way at night from the UNLV campus, and it was beautiful. And then, of course, development hit, and now it's just another town.
Yeah. It's and Port St. Lucie, of course, is definitely experiencing that. It's so hard to explain to people who are not used to a phenomena like Port St. Lucie in the Tradition area. I cannot. I don't even think I can count. I'm sure somebody knows the number of how many units have gone in the past year, how many are going to go in 2023. It's huge, folks.
Oh, the
cities,
EDC would be able to track all that stuff.
I'm sure. They had to get permits, so somebody clearly has the data. I just don't have it, but I can see it mushrooming.
Sure. There's a photo I posted this morning, and it is Oakland Park, Fort Lauderdale, and there are two photos. One is 1952, and it's like almost all swampland. And then compared to today, and it's just all buildings. It's kind of sad when you think about it, but it's development.
It's development, and people are emptying out of the north and coming south.
Mm-hmm.
There is definitely a population shift going on as people are tired of putting up with the snow, and mobility is much more possible. And here, there's air conditioning. Right, so the swamplands of Florida are not quite as uninviting. Same thing is true in Tucson.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the advent of the air conditioner dramatically changed Tucson from the old Pueblo to the teeming city that it is now, and much to the dismay of the astronomers up at Kitt Peak.
I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. They've got on their wall a series of photos taken every 10 years.
Oh, cool.
Of
I don't remember
the light
that.
pollution over Tucson.
Oh, that would be classic.
And you can see in the beginning there's like nothing, and then there's a little bit of glow, and now it's just especially as Tucson goes up Oro Valley. That's you would not recognize. I don't think I would recognize what all has happened up in Oro Valley.
No.
It's just mind-boggling to see how that is. And I think of the students that I have at IRSC, and to a slightly lesser degree at Kaiser. The Kaiser students tend to be a little bit older, but they're still, you realize the incoming freshman class, especially the dual enrolls, have no idea of what life was like before 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea. I actually showed one of my classes on Wednesday dial phones to talk about how you dial a number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's, we talked about wired into the wall, right? And I know that you remember that, where the phone, you could only go so many feet. And I can remember putting the phone down like on the bed and then stretching out the wire to the receiver to try to reach the dresser or something like that, depending on the length of the cords and the layout of the room.
25-foot extension cables.
Oh yeah. Well, but I can remember. I can remember when there weren't jacks. When the phones were actually hardwired, into the wall.
Yes.
And the phone company could actually send a signal through and see how many receivers you had on the line by the impedance on the line. Yeah.
Yeah.
Long gone. And then there were jacks, and then you could move things, and they went to push buttons instead of dials, and now most people don't even have a landline anymore. I can remember the shift from landlines being hooked into 911, because 911 is also relatively new.
Yes. Oh yeah.
I'm guessing like the 1990s, somewhere in there.
Probably 80s.
80s?
Is my guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I can remember initially when it came through, it was only the landlines that had the 911 capability. And now you call in on your cell phone and it knows which tower you've pinged off of.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the amount of technology in the phone is more than my Apple IIe had on my desk, which was as much or more than the giant IBM 360 had when it was the new hot thing.
You know, it's funny you mentioned the light pollution. When we were coming back from Tampa the other night, and it was, 12 or 1 in the morning, and we hit Yeehaw Junction, which is it's about 45 miles away, somewhere around there. But you could see way off in the distance
the light,
faint lights.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, wow, really? And I mean, it had been pitch black on the road that we were on.
So I'll flip that back to my flying days. Coming out one night, late at night, out of something in the Pittsburgh area, and getting up to altitude and seeing Akron-Canton. And the rule is that if you see the airport, if you've got line of sight, you can call in for clearance to land. And so I did that right over, just having left the airspace of Pittsburgh. So I was a good half-hour flight yet away.
So that's how many miles?
This is a 2-hour drive, so
it's about 100 and some odd miles.
Yeah, 120 miles.
But you could see the lights?
I could see the lights because they're very distinctive. Akron-Canton has, and I think that's how my dog knew when we pulled off the expressway. I've often talked about that he knew when we pulled off the expressway, but there was a certain kind of mercury orange light that the parking lot at the airport had.
Oh, yeah?
And that was very distinctive and different. And, of course, North Canton and Canton were not as built up as they are today either. They've had tremendous building growth. Where I lived in North Canton was a new area. Mm-hmm. Do we have somebody on a line? We do. We have Kurt on line 1. Thank you, Kurt, for calling. You're on Ask a Rabbi.
Hi. Good morning.
Hi, Kurt. Good morning. Again, thank you for calling.
Happy Friday.
Thank you.
You know, you were talking just now about the 911, and you probably remember when it first came out, they said call 911.
Yeah.
If you remember, the first ads were call 911, the emergency system, and they had to change it
after
and start
9/11.
saying 911 because people couldn't find the 11 on their phone.
You're right.
And that's a fact.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so you're absolutely right, Kurt. For those who are not on the radio, who don't hear it, who are on the Facebook feed, what Kurt is saying was at the beginning of 911, they used to call it 9/11. And, of course, now we keep it different so that it's different from 9/11, from the event. But it became 911 because people were looking for the 11 on their phones. And you're right. Sometimes it does astound me at how little observation we make of the world around us. But yeah, so the reason that they tried to do 9/11 was that we can handle information if it's in chunks. We can handle more information. So recognizing the numbers 2023 is easier than 3202. And I purposely went backwards so that you'd have to separate the numbers out.
Well, there's a YouTube video that you might get a kick out of. You might have to do a search for it. But fairly recently, they took 10 college kids and they put them in a room with an old
dial phone,
one of those old telephone, and they said, if you can dial these numbers, we'll give you $1,000. And they gave them a list of both the old exchanges. You know, remember that it was Zenith. And anyway, they put them in this room with this rotary phone, and not one of those kids knew what to do.
We actually talked about it in class about how you dialed it and how remember the old dial locks that people used to put in those phones too? They used to put the little round thing with the key that you put in either the 1 or the 2 so that you couldn't get it past. You couldn't get a number to go out.
Huh.
I heard you talking about the 9/11, and that brought back some.
Well, thank you for that, Kurt. I appreciate that. A little bit of nostalgia about the old beginnings of 911, and what a way that has changed. How many lives that has saved over the decades.
It's a wonderful service. I mean, it's been a lifesaver for a lot of people. One quick question.
Yes.
You are of the Reformed Jewish sect, correct?
Reform, no ED on the end, but yes.
Reformed,
yes.
Right?
Reform.
And I know the other one is an Orthodox. What is the third one?
There's also conservative, there's Reconstructionist, there's modern Orthodox. There are as many different branches and streams and movements of Judaism as you can imagine. It's not one religion, it's a family of religions.
The three most common are the Reformed, Conservative, and Orthodox, correct?
With Reconstructionists coming in a close fourth as far as numbers of synagogues.
Well, what is
the largest is the Orthodox, but their communities tend to be small because they have to be within walking distance.
What is the is that
Reconstructionist
the woke sect now?
I'm sorry?
Is the Reconstructed is that the new liberal woke sect?
Reconstructionist has been around. I can remember it in the 80s. So it's been around for a while. It started with Rabbi Mordechai M. Kaplan of blessed memory. He's the one who started it.
I'm familiar with the Conservative and the Reform because I grew up a big part of my life in Wilmington, Delaware, and we were there were only two Gentile families in the neighborhood. So got exposed to a lot of the different.
And you were one of those, huh?
the different parts of the culture and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so anyway, it's an interesting thing, right? People ask sometimes, what the old question of what are Jews and what is Judaism, and it was asked an interesting question from somebody who immigrated from an area where Jews are called Hebrews because there's a variety of names. In fact, the Reform movement, the Union of Reform Congregations, that
the name of your
congregation
synagogue, the Chaim, the Eitz Chayim, is that Chaim? If I remember correctly, if I go back to my German, Heim means home in Germany. Does that mean the same in
No, that's Heim, and this is Chaim, which means life. So Eitz Chayim is the tree of life.
Chaim, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
there's a ch in there, which in German is only an H, right?
I was thinking it was H-E-I-M, which
no.
Was, okay, all right.
No, that would be a tree house. But no, we're a tree of life. So right, thank you, Kurt. Thank you for calling. Appreciate all of that. And
so Kurt's from Delaware. I wonder if he has any presidential papers. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't want to
down boy.
Don't want to go there.
Yeah. Down boy. We don't go there. We go many places.
Well, now, you just mentioned that in some cases the Jews were called Hebrews.
Right.
That's a language, right?
It's a language. It's a people. It's one of the things that Joseph says he's an Ivri. It was a group of people. It was an identification, and it varies depending on. These words come from a variety of places. Jew comes from Judea, the southern kingdom.
Makes perfect sense.
Makes perfect sense, and you can actually hear that in German. It's Jude, but in Russian it's Ivreski, which comes from the Hebrew. So those are words that have come and gone depending on how much of a slur they become in the moment. Right. So in some places, Jew is a derogatory, in part because of the way that it's used in Christian scriptures, because there is a distinction. in Christian scriptures between Judeans and folks from the northern kingdom of Israel and the folks from the kingdom in the middle called Samaria, which neither the south nor the north particularly liked, because they had a more blended culture. And they stopped the Bible a whole lot sooner. They stopped it after Joseph. So they don't have the prophets and the writings and all of that in their scriptures. So the Samaritans are still there. They still do their cultural thing. And it's written in an older Hebrew alphabet. It's kind of interesting. It's really fascinating. But when the Reform movement first started, it was the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, in part because the term Jew had become used as a derogatory. So it varies depending on the culture in which the community is sitting, right? So are you from the tribe of Judah, which becomes the kingdom of Judea, the southern kingdom, that went as far north as Jerusalem? Jerusalem was actually not in a given tribe. That's why it was called the city of David. When David was king, it became the capital of all of David's countries, which included Judea and what became Samaria, and the kingdom of Israel, and the kingdom of Edom, and all of the various kingdoms. Idumea, where Herod comes from, is a separate little entity to the south. But we're talking about a time when countries or peoples or kingdoms is probably the best word, was much smaller, when they were city-states, kind of, or small collectives, small amalgams of little city-states. And that's what Judea was. It had a couple of little towns in it, but they weren't anywhere near as big as things are today. And there was a distinction. You have to read the Hebrew carefully, but even through the books of prophets, there is a difference in a country that has a king, which means it has a standing army, and countries that don't. If you don't, it's a sherit. It's not as big and formal as a kingdom, because kingdoms have standing armies.
Wow. Okay.
So they're more defendable. And so when the Israelites, right, the folks in the Bible, which we try to remember, is it's a connected but different group of people. So when that group of people complains about not having a king, it's about not having a standing army, so that you have to have a militia that comes out and defends when marauders and raiders come through. It's a different structure. But the downside of that is that kingdoms cost money.
Sure.
You can't keep a standing army without a tax.
Taxes. Yep.
Right, to keep that structure going. So, yeah. It's those are very subtle things, but they're very definitely there, and they influence a lot of what goes on. And you can hear it, for example, in the book of Amos. You can hear the discussion because Amos doesn't just yell at Judea. In fact, Judea is one of the last ones that he yells at. But he yells at all of the different kingdoms in the area, and some that are not kingdoms. Some that are sherit, that are... and no, that's not to be like Sharia. They just sound similar, I think. Language is also...
Definitely don't want to go there.
Language is... Well, it might just mean a community, you know. It means according to the Quran, is what Sharia means. Law that doesn't violate, like the anti-usury laws that are in the Quran.
Yeah, but...
It doesn't mean slapping people. It doesn't mean cutting off wrists. It means... It's used for tort law, really, is the bottom line. How do you handle harm?
But when you hear Sharia law now...
depends on who's using it.
The people who have pretty much hijacked that religion.
Well, that's how it's used, certainly, by the anti-Islam crowd. When when a Muslim says to another, this bank will do loans according to Sharia, that means that the interest rates are not usurious. So there's a challenge.
That's intriguing.
Right, because you're not allowed to charge interest according to the Quran, which means that banks would not be there because banks need interest to function. And so there's a creative way that Muslim bankers have developed so that Muslims can buy beautiful homes that cost more than 1 year's salary, or more than they've saved. And so there's a big piece when society moves from in your pocket economics to credit-based economics. Things change. And scriptures, both Jewish and Christian and Muslim, all have provisions in them against overly priced interest rates. Because even then they recognize that loan sharks are sharks. And they prey on people. And they wanted to limit that. They wanted to keep people away from the loan sharks. So they created these rules that said, no, you can't enter into a relationship with somebody who's going to charge you usury. Who's going to overcharge the interest rates, which today we recognize as credit cards.
Even back then.
Even back then it was an issue. And there's a provision Jewishly, which is kind of interesting because is the Shemitah year, the Jubilee year, when property goes back to the original family owner. So you could buy property, but you couldn't buy it forever unless you were a member of that tribe who owned that territory. And that doesn't always work, especially the last 5 or 10 years. Who wants to buy something and know you're only going to be there for 4 or 5 years? For most things, that's not going to work. And so actually, Akiva came up with something called a prosbul, which is a legal document to allow somebody to own it, release it, and re-own it so that they could get over the problems of the Jubilee. And it's kind of interesting because he bases it on the curve of the letters, on the decoration of the letters in the scroll. And obviously, it's a creative fiction. But sometimes you need that because society has moved and changed to a place where the old solutions are just not worded. The intent's good, but the wording is not necessarily helpful in a certain modern society. So as I started to mention in my answer to Kurt, Orthodox congregations, there's many of them, but they tend to be smaller because that's a population that for the most part is going to walk to the synagogue on Friday and Saturday on the Shabbat. They're not going to drive their cars. And for a long time, conservative didn't either, but the standing joke was, you park the car a block away and walk the last block. And part of that is a reflection that in today's environment, especially as we move out to suburbia, being within walking distance of something, it does not work. Case in point, conservative congregation. I was talking with somebody in Ohio about the conservative congregation and the problems of walking, that one of the reasons that I didn't walk to the synagogue, because I used to come on Saturday mornings, was that I was too far. And if I didn't walk, then I wouldn't come, which is where you run into a dilemma, right? Which rule do you break, and how do you work around that? And the answer that I said is, well, I get on my car on my property, so it's within my confines, and I drive here, and I get out of the car inside the confines of the temple. So outside of my car, I really haven't broken the boundaries. It's a little bit of a workaround too.
A little technicality,
but the point that I'm going to get to on that was that the person I was talking to said, "Well, I walk," and I said, "Well, how far are you?" He says, oh, between a mile and a half to a mile and 3/4. And I said, well, A, that's a healthy walk, and B, it's too far. It exceeds the allowable walking distance that you were allowed to carry things. And then he says to me, well, and I said, well, what about when it rains? What do you do? He says, well, I carry my umbrella. I'm like, well, that's a tent by Talmudic definition. You're carrying a tent. You're erecting a tent when you deploy your umbrella. So you have to deal with the changes in society and understand that, yes, it's easy to flick on the umbrella, to open it, to hit the button and deploy it. It wasn't so easy when they first came out, and it certainly wasn't easy in biblical days before we had all the cute mechanisms that we have now. Who knows what they had, though. But in those days, carrying and schlepping were much more work than they are today, especially if you have the car. You just throw it in the car and it comes with you. Right? You're not carrying it, you're just conveying it. So society changes. And Reform, of course, has always had big parking lots because people park and they live farther away and they come in for services. Reform congregations in general are the largest in the U.S. Now, here in Port St. Lucie, there is no congregation in Fort Pierce. There are two in Port St. Lucie, neither of which is very big. We're the tiny ones. We're the new ones. And then there is a Reform congregation in Stewart. There is also a Chabad, which is an Orthodox in Palm City. So they service the Stewart, and they say they service Port St. Lucie as well. Obviously, you can't walk from Port St. Lucie to Palm City. And then the next congregation is up in Vero, and I understand there's a Chabad up there as well. So Chabad is expanding. They are deploying their shlichim, their sent representatives. And the starter of the renewal group, which is not a movement in the same way that Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, and that group is, he was actually from Chabad originally. And when he got sent to the college campuses, he looked around and went, the world is changing. We need to renew Judaism, which is why we have on our, we say that we're Reform with a renewal flair, because we're a member of both the Reform movement, because that's the practice, and then we're joyful and singing, so we call ourselves Renewal. So that's what renewal is. It's about understanding the tradition and pulling it through into today's culture.
But it's all the same Talmud and message, though. Or is it?
It is the same scriptures. It's the same Hebrew scriptures, Jewish scriptures. And there are some different beliefs around that. So the Orthodox are going to say that God dictated it and Moses sat there with something, a quill or a chisel. Right? Obviously, you can't carry all of Torah on stone. The tablets are what might have been carried, and even that's probably pretty big. Or was it probably a smaller thing, trying to distill how to live in community down to a few basic rules. But the Talmud has more authority. It's a commentary. And the Orthodox will say that it is Torah Baal Peh. It is the oral tradition of how to understand the written tradition. It's commentary. And it carries more weight in an Orthodox congregation. And there was a time, not so much now, but there was a time when Reform used to describe itself as post-halachic. Halacha means the walkway, the guide path. And most of the laws or guides that Orthodox use come out of Talmud. There's also a set of laws that comes out of Torah itself. But, for example, what we do or don't do on Shabbat is not. All it says in scriptures is stop malaching, whatever, we don't really know what that word meant. It comes from the same word as angel. Angels transform the moment when they do their thing, whatever it is. And the rabbis say, well, it comes right before the instruction of how to build the Mishkan. So it must be the Mishkan must be something you can't do on Shabbat. And so from there, they derive 39 sets of behaviors that you're not to do on Shabbat. But there's an underlying spirit to that set of rules. For example, the way it gets interpreted now is tearing the toilet paper so that you don't tear on Shabbat. But if you pre-tear on Thursday and Friday the toilet paper, you will make sure that you have enough in the house that you don't run out on Saturday. So you're not faced with either the inconvenience of not having it, scrambling, or going to the store and spending money, which is one of the more serious restrictions. But is it really, now we don't spend money. Now we dink our phone, we tap our credit card. You don't carry, muggings have gone down because people aren't carrying cash. So there's these huge changes in society that unless we understand them, we don't really understand how things came to be. And so renewal looks at all of that and says, how do we observe the spirit of Shabbat? So we turn on electricity, we stream our services, we use microphones, we turn lights on and off, because those things, without them, life is much more difficult. And the arching rule behind all of Jewish law and guidelines is you shall live by it.
I got a question, and this gets to the government today, $31 trillion in debt. Is there anything back in the day?
They would have been
in the
appalled.
Talmud? Okay.
They would have been appalled. And look what it's doing. Servicing that debt is hurting us. And I get it when people say, well, we can't aid the rest of the world because that increases our debt. That's a catch-22, because if we don't help the world and we are the big brother or the big sister.
We are, like it or not, we are.
We are. We have a responsibility. We have firstborn responsibilities of caring for our neighbor. And, that does mean maybe we do have to service some debt. We've got obligations. We are not on the planet in an isolated fashion. It's part of why America got into World War II, was because if we didn't, the world would have become less livable. And so we do have obligations. You are not free from caring for those that are less fortunate. That's not just your neighbor down the street, but it's your neighbor across the pond. It's your neighbor across the sea. It's the peoples being persecuted and abused, whether it's in Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, North America, Australia. I don't care where it is. We are one species. We are all humans.
It's amazing, of course, dealing with some of the players on the IRSC team. And, of course, one happens to be, or actually two, from South Sudan. And oh, my God.
There's a ton of stuff
Horror
that never
stories
makes...
over there.
Well,
Horror
I mean,
stories.
very few people know how much COVID is rampaging through China right now.
Well, they just open it up, and so doesn't that stand to reason in a way that that stuff's going to happen?
Yeah, it is, because they don't... Well, and the other part that's really scary about China, which is that they don't have anywhere near the vaccine rate that
And
we
their-
have.
And their vaccine's not as good as what we have.
Right. Which is true, because they weren't going to use it as much, so there wasn't the need to make it as good. It's not quite as effective. So there's many different pieces to this, and somebody was bringing up the Ebola scares. There's lots of stuff going on that, for most people, is below the news threshold. You are very attuned to news because, in 10 minutes we're going to hear... what's his name with the 5-minute news on the hour, and or rather in 5 minutes you're going to hear it. I have to look at the clock and read it correctly, That's a hard one to read. That's digital. Never mind.
Yeah. Now, that's the other thing. Do any of your students...
I've not asked them if
know how to
I
read
don't know
those
if they
round
know.
things?
I don't know if they do. It's a good question. Well, so here's a piece that I'm dealing with, and I'm going to have to modify an assignment. I have one of my assignments in philosophy. The question is this: a PhD, a doctorate of philosophy, is the terminal degree in many sciences. It's a terminal degree in education, in psychology, and in many other sciences.
Mm-hmm.
The terminal degree is a PhD. And the question is, why is philosophy the terminal degree? You would think that was an easy question. I mean, you have to think about it. But I would say that a good 20% of my students have no idea what the word terminal means. I have to define it to them as the highest, the ultimate, the end, the most significant. They don't understand the word the use of the word terminal in that sentence. And what's the other part of that to me is they don't know enough to know that they don't understand it. They don't recognize that what's causing them confusion as they read that sentence is that they don't know what the word terminal is. And so I don't understand your question. Could you please rephrase it? And what that really means, we used to play Right What the Captain Means coming out of Vietnam. But what the students mean is tell me what the words mean here, because I don't know enough to know which word I have to look up. They don't realize that their understanding of the word terminal, thank you, movies and games, is not the full meaning of the word terminal.
Exactly.
And I think that's interesting. I am seeing such a dramatic drop-off in vocabulary of incoming freshmen that it scares me as a psychologist, as an educator, and as a rabbi.
How much of that is pandemic?
It's not. The foundations of vocabulary are from grade school.
Wow.
One of the things that we've dropped in school, they don't do vocabulary lists anymore.
Whoa, are you kidding?
No.
It's mandatory.
They don't do that, and they don't do the spelling tests the way that you and I of the Stone Age did. They just don't do that. And so they don't have the faculty, the facility with vocabulary. And the scary part about that is that intelligence is a function of vocabulary. It is related to your vocabulary. No, it doesn't mean that you're stupid, but you will not have the skill set needed to be able to read and learn from what you read.
Vocabulary and math.
Yeah, we're losing both of those. And if we don't turn that around real soon, we're going to be hurting as a country sooner than we'd like.
Ooh.
So that's my wish for the future, that we get smarter and make our kids smarter, because there are peoples on this planet that are doing that, whose kids' English is better than ours, and it's not their first language.
Wow.
On that note, I wish everybody an absolutely wonderful week. Enjoy the warmth as it comes, as Florida works our way out of the struggle of cold temperatures, what we call winter. My plants are looking for something to be warmer. So, God willing, see you next week. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb for Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. Come and renew your inner Jew.
This is WPSL, Port St. Lucie.